Hello, future programmers. Welcome to C++ for Beginners. My name is Scott, and in this video, I'll be walking you through building your first C++ program. In this tutorial series, we'll be using an IDE called CodeBlocks. An IDE, or Integrated Development Environment, is a packaged set of programs that will allow us to write, edit, compile, and run our code. CodeBlocks is free to download and use. To begin, go to the codeblocks.org website and navigate to the Downloads page. From here, choose the first link, Download the binary release. So depending on your environment, there are a variety of download choices. Since I'm using Windows, I'm going to select one of the programs. Right here is the one we need with the MingW compiler, as you can see by a note down here. So move one over and select one of the mirrors. If you are in Windows, the download will automatically prompt you to save. Go ahead and save it. If for some reason you do not get an automatic prompt, you can pick your download here. Just make sure to pick the one with the compiler and debugger. Once the download is completed, open up your Downloads folder. Double-click on the Setup exe. You may have to agree to any prompt to install the software. From there, click on Next. I agree. Choose all the defaults. Next. And from here you can install. Once you have CodeBlocks installed, you should find the icon either in your desktop or in your Start menu. Double-click the CodeBlock icon to launch the program. Since this is the first time running CodeBlocks, you will not have any projects or files like I have, but the Start screen should be similar. Here we'll choose Create a New Project. You can also do this from the File menu. File, New, Project. In the window that opens, you have a bunch of options for various types of projects that you can build. In this example, we're going to use Console Application, so go ahead and double-click that. Also make sure that you choose C++. On the next screen, we'll enter the name of our project. I'm going to be using 01 Hello World. I'm prefixing it with a number so that our files will be easier to find as this series progresses. Go ahead and click Next once you've selected a name. You can choose the defaults at this point. Go ahead and click on Finish. And here we go. Here's our brand new project. You will not see anything at first, so you have to go over to the left. And here you can see the workspace, our project name, and the Sources folder. Click the plus to expand the Sources folder, and double-click Main CPP. And here we go. Here's our code. Your screen should now look like mine. The first thing you will notice is that there's a bunch of code already here. This is actually a very basic template that all the C++ programs we will be making will use. It even has a line that will display some output, which I think you can already guess what it will do. We can go ahead and compile and run this code just as it is. At the top of the editor, you'll see a little gear with a green triangle. Just to the left of this, you'll also see just a green triangle. To the left of that, you'll see the gear. The gear is for build, which the compiler uses to turn this code into something the computer can execute. The green triangle is just basically the same thing as running a program, much like you would do from your desktop. And the icon we're going to be using just combines the two to save a step. Go ahead and click on the Build and Run. So after building and running the program, a console window should appear, as you can see here. Since it is such a simple program, it basically displays the Hello World message that you've seen earlier in the code. While this is a very small program with a simple output, it actually accomplished quite a bit for us. It shows that the program was able to compile and is also able to run. This shows that your installation of CodeBlocks went smoothly and that your compiler is working as it should be. It also gives us a peek into the basic program structure of a C++ program. You can go ahead and close out the console window by hitting a key or clicking on the X. Okay, so what does this code do? We have an include statement. An include statement basically includes some other already pre-written code into our program. You can think of it as sort of an attachment to your program, much like you may attach a picture or other file to an email. So while the code in an attachment does not display directly in our editor, it is still attached to the program, and a compiler can use it as a reference later on. These files are often referred to as libraries, as they are usually made up of several bits of code that perform similar functions. In our case, we are including the library IOStream into our program. This library defines and provides functionality for working with input and output stream objects, hence the name IOStream or input-output stream. There's a wealth of online reference material where you can look up any topic in C++. One such website is cplus.com. Here, I have pulled up the page giving a brief summary of the IOStream library. First interesting thing to note is that when we include the IOStream library in our program, by virtue of the IOStream library referencing other libraries or include files, we are also including these other libraries into our program. Okay, now here we can see the objects that are part of the IOStream library. The first two objects, cin and cout, we'll become familiar with very shortly. Now let's go back to the code. Line 3, we see using namespace std. Std stands for standard, so in this case, we're using the standard namespace. A namespace is a way to cordon off variables, functions, and other items in C++ within different scopes. What I mean by scope is that we could have different instances that may contain the same variable name, such as cout. I know this may be confusing at first, so just bear with me for now, and this will become more apparent later on in the series. Anyway, enough with the definitions. Let's move on to seeing what the more immediate effect of having this line of code in our program does. For now, I'm just going to comment out this line. A comment basically tells our compiler to ignore everything that follows it. It's a great way of adding basically comments to your code. In this case, we're just disabling this line. Now let's build and run this program. We notice we get an error. If we look down here in our build messages area, we can see the error is endl was not declared in this scope. What this means is that without the namespace standard line, the compiler does not know where the endl to use or where it comes from. We can fix this by prefixing it with a standard namespace. Now we build and run the program. We still get an error, but this time we notice that's not due to the endl, it's actually due to the cout. We can prefix this as well. Then build and run. Now our program runs as before. So I hope this clears up the using namespace standard a little bit. Some people advocate for using it for new coders, as it is somewhat easier, it saves you a little bit typing. And I do agree with this, but it also leads to confusion later on when our programs become much more complex and such prefixing conventions are commonplace. Myself, I think the sooner you get used to looking at this code in this form, the easier it will be as we move on. So when can you drop the prefix and start using the namespace standard line? Well, I can't tell you exactly, but it does remind me of the famous quote in the movie The Matrix. Neo, what are you trying to tell me? That I can dodge bullets? Morpheus replies, no, Neo, I'm trying to tell you that when you are ready, you won't have to. But by all means, use it if it helps you out. It's just that I'll be using the standard prefix throughout this series. Okay, so now we are ready to go on to the next line. Int main parentheses. As you may be able to guess, this is where we get to the main part of the program. Main is a function, and by convention is the main starting point in any C++ program. We will cover functions more in depth later, but for now, it is a collection of code for doing a related set of operations. A program can have many functions, even hundreds, but they all need at least one, which is the main function. The int for integer is the return type of the function. In this case, when main finishes, it will return an integer value. In this case, it's actually going to return 0, as we can see down here. Let me run the program once again. Maybe notice at the bottom, the process returns 0. It gets from here, and it actually returns it to int. This main just However, later on as we write our own functions, we may want them to return a specific value, which we will also be using the return statement. But we'll cover that more in detail later. The name main is just the name for the function. In this case, main is important because the compiler looks specifically for this function as to know the program's main entry point or starting point. But any other function can be named however you want. The parentheses are where one will input parameters to the function. In this case, we are using empty parentheses to indicate we are not passing anything into the function. We then have opening and closing braces to encapsulate all the code that is to be part of the main function. The act to group together the code and their use will become more apparent as we progress in this series. Again, we will cover functions in much greater detail in upcoming videos. And now we come to probably the actual part of the program that visibly does anything, the output. Notice we are using the standard cout function, which is part of the IOStream library we included above. Next, we have what is known as an insertion operator, as shown here. These are used to indicate we want the code that follows to be inserted into the stream to be displayed as output. So just think of it as inserting hello world into the cout, which is console output. The next part is probably the most familiar to you, the hello world within double quotes. This is a message that actually prints out in our small program. The quotes tell the computer it is a string and not a variable. Then we have another set of assertion operators following the string and the standard endl. Endl basically stands for end line, which is similar to a carriage return. Notice that this line is also terminated with a semicolon. In C++, semicolons are used to indicate a line of code is complete. It's kind of like the period at the end of a sentence. We also have the return line as shown before, again in this case returning 0. Finally, we have the closing brace, which represents the end of the main function. So this has been a very basic look at our program, and while the hello world is the standard rite of passage for new programmers, it is to say the least a bit underwhelming. In the next video, we'll be taking a look at an improved hello world program that isn't quite as boring, and we will also introduce a lot of new concepts. Until then, I hope you liked this video and found the information useful. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you.